One of the unfortunate and inaccurate stereotypes of the creative genius is the skinny, bent-over nerd, the uncoordinated, out-of-shape Poindexter. In reality, geniuses are, like Leonardo da Vinci, possessed of remarkable physical strength, poise, and Herculean stamina. In this section, I'm going to offer you a Synvergent approach to fitness, an approach that treats the body as an intelligent whole system, inseparable from the mind. It begins with a paradox. Accept yourself as you are and train to improve simultaneously. Research in the new field of psychoneuroimmunology demonstrates that our attitudes affect our physiology from moment to moment. Begin your psychophysical fitness training by adopting a positive attitude based on this assumption. My body is a self-organizing, self-healing system that thrives with age. Evidence supporting this assumption is provided by the works of Drs. Chopra, Dossi, Ornish, Siegel, and many, many others. Just as our attitudes have a profound effect on the body, the state of the body has a profound effect on the mind. Alertness, acuity, a feeling of well-being, and mental stamina are all affected positively by appropriate fitness training. Elements of psychophysical fitness include exercise, diet, rest, and a commonly overlooked but tremendously important element, the cultivation of body awareness and poise. Let's talk a little bit first about exercise, diet, and rest, and then I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on this last element, body awareness and poise. So exercise. Our bodies are designed for movement. Running, dancing, swimming, throwing, catching, lifting, and stretching are natural expressions of this design. Modern sedentary lifestyles necessitate making a special effort to allow this natural form of self-expression and health maintenance. A balanced exercise program develops aerobic capacity, strength, and flexibility. Let's talk first about aerobics. Dr. Kenneth Cooper, originator of the concept of aerobics, found that moderate exercise sustained for a period of 20 minutes, at least 3 times a week, has profoundly beneficial effects for the body and mind. Aerobic means with oxygen, and aerobic exercise strengthens your cardiovascular system, improving blood and therefore oxygen flow to your body and brain. Your brain is on average less than 3% of your body's weight, yet it uses more than 30% of your body's oxygen. As you become aerobically fit, you more than double your capacity to process oxygen. Cooper found that in addition to the cardiovascular benefits, subjects maintaining a regular program of aerobic exercise experience significant improvements in alertness, emotional stability, and are less susceptible to fatigue. Moreover, regular aerobic exercise stimulates your metabolism, improving digestion and regulating weight. The key to a successful aerobic fitness program is to find an activity or combination of activities that you really enjoy. Let's talk about strength. Competitive athletes know that strength training is a key to high performance. But weightlifting is also valuable for anyone seeking optimum wellness. It's an efficient method for burning unnecessary body fat while cultivating muscle tone and resilience. Weight training improves the strength of connective tissue and bone as well as muscle. Physical strength and lively muscle tone support the capacity for focused attention and mental stamina. World chess champion Garry Kasparov trains for the ultimate mental combat by running, boxing, and weightlifting. Bodybuilding legend Arnold Schwarzenegger emphasizes that effective weight training is primarily a discipline of creative visualization and focused attention. To begin a strength training program, find a good coach or trainer and seek guidance on developing proper form. And remember, no brain, no gain. Flexibility. Stretching benefits your circulatory and immune systems while preventing injury and optimizing the joy of movement. Practice simple stretching exercises before and after aerobic and strength training, upon arising, and every now and then throughout your day. The secret to a good stretch is to take your time, bring your full awareness to the process, and allow easy release of muscle groups in harmony with extended exhalations. Never bounce or try to force a stretch. Hatha yoga is probably the best, most sophisticated way to learn how to stretch. Okay, now let's talk about diet. Diet fads come and go, but there are a few common sense guidelines for healthy eating that stand the test of time. Basically, to live a balanced life, eat a balanced diet. Seek food that is fresh, wholesome, and aesthetically pleasing. Eat plenty of fiber, drink at least 8 glasses of pure water each day, and moderate your intake of salt, sugar, fat, red meat, caffeine, and alcohol. Most importantly, learn to listen to your body and determine what you actually want to eat at any given time. If in doubt, imagine how you'll feel after you eat the food in question. Then, be sure to pause for a moment or two before eating and bring your awareness to the present moment. Savor the smell, taste, and texture of every bite and enjoy every meal. The issue of appropriate rest is becoming more and more important as people get busier and busier. Disasters like 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and the Challenger explosion all had one element in common. Fatigued workers were too exhausted to make appropriate judgments that could have prevented these and many other tragedies. Accidents caused by insufficient rest and overwork cost the global economy more than $80 billion per year. In the organizational world, exhaustion has become a way of life. When I ask my corporate classes if they suffer from fatigue, many are too tired to respond. 14-hour workdays are not uncommon. And a lot of people get into a perverse pride in overwork, boasting about their long hours and the number of years they've gone without a vacation. If you're working intensely for the sake of quality of your work and your life, it is essential to discipline yourself to get adequate rest. Enjoy your full vacation time every year. Discover the amount of sleep you need to feel rested and invigorated, and then follow a regular schedule of retiring and arising. You can also optimize your daily performance by taking power naps. Power naps are the stamina secret of many high performers, from Napoleon, Thomas Edison, and Salvador Dali, to industrialists John D. Rockefeller, Armand Hammer, and Presidents Teddy Roosevelt, John Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, and Bill Clinton. As Winston Churchill once urged, nature had not intended man to work from 8 in the morning until midnight without the refreshment of blessed oblivion, which, even if it lasts only 20 minutes, is sufficient to renew all vital forces. So, I've given you a brief overview of exercise, aerobics, strength, and flexibility, some of the keys to healthy diet, and we've talked a bit about rest and the importance of taking your vacations and power naps. A lot of this is pretty much common sense, common knowledge, but very important to review and even more important to make sure you're actually practicing it. But now we come to something that, although people are talking about it more and more, a lot of folks still really don't understand. And this is the area of body awareness and poise. So let's begin by considering the following question. How do you know when you are stressed? Well, stop and think about it. You probably say, well, I guess it must be that my body tells me. Some people know from just a nuance of neck tension or a slightly tight stomach. Others don't figure it out until they develop a stress-related ailment. Body awareness is the first step in self-awareness and a key to true fitness. Sensitivity to bodily feelings and sensations provides crucial information for knowing and responding to your true needs. Zen masters teach that a key to well-being and enlightenment is eat when hungry, sleep when tired. Yet frequently, the pace of our lives and the intensity of the external assault on our senses drowns out the sometimes subtle messages our bodies provide. Body awareness is also the key to cultivating poise, or relaxed concentration, the missing link in many fitness programs. Poise is the balanced distribution of energy in the body. Exercise without poise often does more harm than good. Slumping runners and contorted weightlifters, for example, create what philosopher John Dewey called compensatory maladjustments, distorting the whole system to produce a specific limited result. The key to poise and high performance in many activities is this synvergent state, the state of relaxed concentration. The most effective way to learn relaxed concentration is the technique developed in 1896 by Australian actor F.M. Alexander. More than just a method for cultivating poise, Alexander's technique is the most effective approach to changing habit that I have discovered in more than 20 years of study. And the art of changing habit is the single most important element in putting your creative genius to work. So, I'm going to tell you the story of Alexander's discovery, teach you a simple exercise you can do on your own to cultivate relaxed concentration and poise. Then I'll introduce you to the 7 operational principles of the Alexander technique. After that, I'll explain how Alexander's principles apply to organizational as well as individual development. F.M. Alexander was born in Tasmania in 1869. As a young man, he began pursuing a career in the theater, doing one-man shows of Shakespeare, tragedy, and comedy. And his career was going quite well, except for one annoying, persistent tendency. In the middle of his presentations, he tended to lose his voice. Well, he consulted his acting coach, speech therapists, eventually went to see all the top medical specialists of his time, and most of them said, well, just rest your voice, try these voiced exercises, try this throat spray. He tried everything that was on the market at the time, but still found that the problem persisted. Finally, he found his way to the doctor who was supposed to be the top expert in the field. He followed this doctor's instructions religiously, but then, in the middle of a major performance, he lost his voice again. Now, a lot of people at this point would have given up and said, well, forget it, I'll go into another line of work. But Alexander was really passionate about his acting career, really wanted to overcome this problem. So he took responsibility for solving it himself. He said, there's got to be something that I'm doing when I'm speaking on stage that's causing this problem. So he realized that he had to find a way of getting objective feedback on what this something might be. And it was clearly something that voice therapists and coaches couldn't help him with. So to get the objective feedback, he set up a system of mirrors and began to just watch himself in those mirrors. And he began to notice that when he tried to recite a particularly difficult passage from Shakespeare, for example, he began to notice a tendency to stiffen his neck. His head seemed to move backwards in relationship to his neck, and he realized that he was shortening his neck muscles every time he did a difficult passage. He then started to notice that whenever he shortened his neck muscles and threw his head back, it caused him to raise his chest and hollow his back. Well, he started to think that maybe this pattern had something to do with his voice problem. So he studied the pattern in more depth and noticed that it was present to a lesser degree even when he was giving a normal recitation, not just a difficult passage, but in his normal speaking. Further observation revealed the fact that this pattern of shortening and stiffening began the moment he even thought about speaking or reciting. So he decided, well, this is probably the cause of my problem, so I'll just stop doing it. So he would think very carefully, okay, I won't do that. But sure enough, as soon as he began to speak, his neck would start to shorten, head was thrown back, chest puffed out a little bit, lower back shortened, whole body stiffened. He realized that his habits were doggedly persistent, and he had to find a way to outwit this fundamental tendency to contract under the stress of speaking. So what he began to do was to stand in front of the mirror and think about speaking. But instead of responding to that thought, he would pause. And instead of going right into the act of speaking, he would think instead about allowing his neck to remain free, his head to go forward and up, which is the opposite of back and down, and his whole torso to lengthen and widen, which was the opposite of shortening and narrowing. Alexander practiced projecting these creative directions for what he called a new use of himself. At first he found that the power of habit was so strong that even though he would project the directions, at the critical moment, the moment of truth, when he began to recite, the pattern would still reassert itself. So he took this exercise further. He said, okay, I'll pause. I'm going to think about speaking, but no, I'm not going to do it. Instead, I'll think about letting my neck be free, letting my head go forward and up, letting my whole torso lengthen and widen. And then instead of going right into speaking, he said, now let me consider another activity like going for a walk or raising my arm. Whatever I do, whether I go for a walk or raise my arm, I'll continue to project the directions to let my neck be free, let my head go forward and up, let my back, torso lengthen and widen. And with this method of focusing purely on the process of his own mind-body integration, thinking of maybe going for a walk, maybe raising his arm, or maybe speaking, Alexander managed to subtly do an end run around his habits. He found that with this mind-opening exercise, focusing on the process of his own poise, he was able to then eventually begin speaking without shortening and stiffening. In other words, he could maintain the free neck, the head easing forward and up, the whole spine lengthening as a new pattern of use of himself as he spoke. And the results were dramatic. Not only did his voice problem go away, but his overall health improved, his energy, his vigor improved, and he soon became famous on the stage for the power of his voice presence and his tremendous voice. Well, people began to flock to him for lessons, including a group of doctors who had an amateur theatrical company. The doctors got the idea after a little while that Alexander might be able to help some of their patients, people who suffered from functional ailments like bad backs and stiff necks and breathing disorders and so on, by teaching them how to re-educate this fundamental habit pattern of contraction. Well, they sent their patients to Alexander, and in case after case, he was able to make progress with their patients. So the doctors got together and decided to sponsor Alexander to sail to London in 1904 to share this amazing discovery with the wider world medical community. Well, Alexander made a significant impact on the medical world of that time, but his greatest impact was on the world of the theater. He soon became known as the protector of the London theater. He gave lessons to all the top actors and actresses of the day. He also worked with the Archbishop of Canterbury, with Aldous Huxley and George Bernard Shaw and many other notable people. After attempting to communicate this discovery to people through verbal instruction, Alexander, being the kind of hands-on person that he was, tried to find a way to help people learn this even more effectively. So he began in the beginning going over and with a very light touch helping people get an experience of using their body without these habitual unconscious contraction patterns. Over the years, he developed this into an amazingly subtle and remarkably powerful system for re-educating mind and body balance. Alexander began to train other people to teach his method, and he continued this work until his death in 1955. Since a little bit after the time of Alexander's death, his work has become increasingly well-known, increasingly popular. It's now a basic part of the curriculum of most of the world's best drama and music schools. They teach it at the Juilliard School as part of the regular curriculum, and at the Royal Academy of Music and the Royal Academy of Drama in England. It's also a regular part of the training regimen of the pilots of the Israeli Air Force, people whose ability to respond freely and without fear is essential not only to their own personal survival, but to the survival of their nation. Now, of course, the best way to learn the Alexander technique is to take private lessons with a certified teacher. Lessons in the technique guide you to change your thinking so you can inhibit interference with the primary control. As you emancipate yourself from this unnecessary tension habit, you'll experience an increasingly delightful sense of balance and relaxed concentration in all your activities. Alexander work will lead you to subtle, profound insights into the inseparable nature of mind and body, forming an experiential framework for appreciating wholeness and nurturing convergent thinking. Appropriate training definitely requires the assistance of a qualified teacher. Contact the North American Society of Teachers of the Alexander Technique for more information on finding a qualified teacher near you. In the meantime, you can begin cultivating body awareness and poise by practicing the following simple procedure. It's called the Balanced Resting State exercise, and just before I teach it to you, I want to teach you one other thing that's going to help you appreciate the balanced resting state and all this business about the Alexander work even more deeply. What we're going to do is retrace the evolution of the upright posture, uniquely human gift without which we would not have evolved our magnificent brain. So I'll describe this exercise to you, and then I want you just to try it first chance you get in the appropriate setting. Ideally, you want to be in a relatively quiet space. Carpeted room would be good. Maybe throw a sheet or a blanket on the floor. And if you had a full-length mirror in that room, that would make it that much better. What I want you to do is lie down on the floor, face down, hands resting at your side. And although it might be a little bit uncomfortable, I want you to put your face straight into the floor, because this position will give you the closest experience you can get to what it would be like to be a creature that just came out of the ocean and was slithering along the sand. The first thing you notice about this position is you can't fall. One of the most fundamental human fears is the fear of falling. Well, in this position, that's one thing you definitely don't have to worry about. And what I'd like you to do is just lie there for as long as you can tolerate it and contemplate, as you lie face down on the ground, what kind of consciousness would a creature with that kind of orientation in the universe be capable of having? What's the potential for perception, for awareness, when you're flat out on the ground? Just to get into it a little bit more, still keeping your hands at your side, I want you just to try some locomotion. Try swiveling your body and moving forward like a snake. just so you can really get into the experience of this basic evolutionary form. Okay, now we're going to take a major leap in evolution. Next thing I want you to do is slide your hands up so that they reach out on either side of your shoulders, kind of like little flippers or rudimentary paws. And you're still flat on the ground, but now you can push up with your little paws there, or flippers, and you can look around a little bit. Now you can move your head around a little bit and start to check out the world. You're still flat on your stomach, but you can get your neck and head up just a little bit so you can start to look around. So think about the leap in consciousness that becomes possible with this slightly expanded view of the world around you. And just have some fun slithering around for a while, imitating this evolving amphibian. Okay, now play that music from 2001: Space Odyssey in your mind and get ready for another major leap of evolution. You're going to come up onto all fours. You're moving from a reptilian, amphibian type mode into a mammalian mode. So to make this more fun, imagine being your favorite mammal. Make the noises of that mammal, really get into it, walk like that mammal walks. Maybe you want to be a tiger, maybe you want to be a leopard, maybe you want to be a cow. Who knows, whatever you like, but practice now walking around on all fours. Notice the greater freedom of movement that you have and the amazing expansion of perception that's possible from being on all fours versus lying flat on the ground. After you've spent a few minutes experiencing that mammalian consciousness, get ready for another staggering, amazing leap. You're going to become a primate. So now you're up on your legs, you're bent over, you're hunched over, and you're doing the monkey thing. So make some good monkey noises, woo, 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 and have some fun appreciating the primate perspective on life. Right? Greater perceptions possible, greater range of awareness becomes instantly possible. So now get ready, because you're going to evolve all the way in to Homo sapiens. So what I want you to do is stand all the way upright at your full stature and look around and appreciate the world from the perspective of a human being. What kind of consciousness is possible for a human being that isn't consciousness for earlier stages of evolution? The truly upright posture liberates your potential for creative genius. But the startle pattern tends to lock us in to slightly earlier forms of evolution. It's more of a sort of Cro-Magnon way of being than a full Homo sapiens way of being. So standing upright is not just a matter of good posture. It's a matter of good thinking, awareness, consciousness, your fully human self. Now that we've retraced the evolution of the upright posture and your own fundamental human consciousness, I want to teach you an exercise that you can actually do every day to help facilitate the full use of your upright poise. The procedure is known variously as the constructive resting state, lying down in semi-supine, or just plain lying down exercise. My favorite name for it is the balanced resting state procedure. I recommend that you practice it a couple of times a day for anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes at a time. All you need to benefit from this exercise is a quiet place, some carpeted floor space, and a few paperback books. Begin by placing the books on the floor. Most people require a pile of books about 4 inches in height. Stand your body's length away from the books with your feet shoulder width apart. Let your hands rest gently at your sides, facing away from the books. Look straight ahead with a soft, alert focus. Pause for a few moments and remember that appreciation for your fully upright stature. Become aware of the contact of your feet on the floor and notice the distance from your feet to the top of your head. Keep your eyes open and alive and listen to the sounds around you. Maintaining this expansive awareness, Move lightly and easily so that you're resting on one knee. Then, lightly and easily, move so that you're sitting on the floor, supporting yourself with your hands behind you, feet in front and flat on the floor, knees bent. Avoid holding your breath. Let your head drop forward a tiny bit to ensure that you're not tightening your neck muscles and pulling your head back. Then, gently roll your spine along the floor so that your head rests on the books. The books should be positioned so that they support your head at the place where your neck ends and your head begins. If your head isn't well positioned, then pause, reach back with one hand and support your head while using the other hand to place the books in the proper position. Your feet remain flat on the floor with your knees pointing up to the ceiling and your hands resting on the floor or loosely folded on your chest. Allow the weight of your body to be fully supported by the floor. Avoid fidgeting or wriggling around to get comfortable. If you're really uncomfortable, then start the whole thing over from the beginning. All you need to do to reap the benefit of this little exercise is to rest in this position. As you rest, gravity will be lengthening your spine while undoing unnecessary twists and tensions. Keep your eyes open to avoid falling asleep. You may wish to bring your attention to the flow of your breathing without trying to change it, and to the gentle pulsation of your whole body. Be aware of the ground supporting your back, allowing your shoulders to rest as your back widens. Think of letting your neck be free as your whole body lengthens and expands. After you've rested for 10 to 20 minutes, get up slowly, being careful to avoid stiffening or shortening your body as you return to a standing position. In order to achieve a smooth, easy transition, decide when you're going to move and then gently roll over onto your front, maintaining your new integration and ease. Then, move into a crawling position and from there back up onto one knee. With your head leading your body movement, come up into standing. Now, standing again, pause for a few moments, listen, eyes alive. Again, feel your feet on the floor and notice the distance between your feet and the top of your head. You may be delighted to discover that the distance has expanded. As you move into the activities of your day, think about not doing anything that interferes with this expansion, ease, and overall buoyancy. You know, research shows that the average human being gets shorter by almost an inch every day. Of course, the good news is when we go to sleep, we recover what we lost in the course of the day. That shortness comes about because as we stiffen and tense ourselves, we put unnecessary pressure on the intervertebral discs of the spine. These discs are made of fluid-filled fibrocartilage, and when we put unnecessary pressure on them from this 15-pound weight that's out of balance, we kind of squeeze the juice out of them, and we literally shorten. Now, if we didn't go to sleep every night, I guess we'd probably disappear after a few months. But the good news is when you sleep and you lie flat, the discs get to rediscover their buoyancy and you wake up taller. Well, this little exercise gives you that same effect of a night's sleep. It lengthens, widens, and rebalances you and helps you tune yourself to greater poise in everything you do. For best results, practice this balanced resting state procedure when you get up in the morning or when you come home from work and before retiring at night. It's especially valuable prior to giving a presentation or any kind of performance, engaging in a competition, or meeting to resolve a conflict with a loved one or your boss, or before any activity that may be stress-inducing. I've been pioneering the application of the Alexander work in both presentation skills and in business in general to help people think more freely and clearly without the limiting, constricting effects of this tension pattern. What I want to do now is take you through the 7 principles. I call them operational principles because they're the 7 principles of his work that are most important for actually applying his genius and putting it to work for you. The 7 principles are: use affects functioning, the whole person, the principle of the primary control, unreliable sensory appreciation, inhibition, direction, and balancing ends and means. So what I'm going to do is take you through each principle, then I'm going to introduce you to an exercise that you can actually do on your own to begin to get something of the experience that the Alexander work offers. Although I'm also going to recommend that you actually go out and have lessons yourself. It's one of the best single things you can do for yourself. So let's talk first about this principle that use affects functioning. Alexander realized early on in his investigation that the way he used himself affected his functioning. In other words, he had a choice about how he used his mind and body, and that choice affected his breathing, his posture, his stature, and ultimately the quality of his voice on the stage. Now, this seems like common sense. I mean, we all know that if you use a chisel as a screwdriver, well, not only will it be a bad screwdriver, but you'll wreck your chisel. Similarly, if you try to use a blender to crush rocks, well, you might get a few pebbles out of it, but you're going to ruin the blender pretty quickly. Alexander realized that that metaphor applies to the way most of us use our own bodies. You know, these days, everybody likes to talk about self-knowledge. And the fundamental question in self-knowledge is, who am I? But before we really consider who we are, I think it's a real good idea to know where we are. And most of us do not even have a practical understanding of our own anatomy. Most folks don't know where their head balance is on their neck, where their hip joints are, and other fundamentals of everyday use of the self. Try a little experiment. Take your index finger right now and put it at the place where you think your neck ends and your head begins. Most people put their finger right in the middle of their neck. The place where your head balances on your neck is actually right up underneath your ears. If you don't believe me, look at a skeleton. You'll see that the spine goes right up. It's called the suboccipital joint, and it's much, much higher than most people think. But the reason most folks will point to the middle of the neck, around the line of the jaw, is because they're used to tensing the big muscles of the neck, so they have obscured their sensory awareness of this very delicate balance point of the head. Okay, now, real quick, take an index finger and point to your hip joints. Again, most people point to the wrong place. They point to their waist. A lot of people bend at the waist, but you know what? Anatomically, there's no such thing as a waist. A waist is a wasted concept. It's a false idea. Your hip joints are actually located much lower down than your waist. If you're sitting down, just feel around in the place there in your lap where you find that major crease. That's actually closer to where your hip joint is. And then to experiment with it a little more, stand up, raise your knee, move your knee from side to side. You'll begin to feel where the joint actually articulates. It's much lower down than the waist or the top of the hip bone, which is what most people point to when they're looking for their hip joint. So a lot of problems, backaches, stiff necks, breathing disorders, and so on, are a function of the fact that we misuse ourselves. We're stiffening our necks, we're bending at the waist, we're tightening our shoulders. We have one part of the body doing the work that's supposed to be done by another part of the body. When your body parts are not doing the work that they were designed to do, when they're not functioning as part of an integrated whole system, they experience unnecessary stress and strain. So when you tighten your shoulders and bend at the waist, you're putting direct and unnecessary pressure on your lower back, on your lumbar vertebrae. And here's the thing about use and functioning. It's not going to kill you to bend at the waist or stiffen your neck once or twice. It's not even going to hurt you very much to do it for a year or two. But over 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, misuse wears away the system. It's like the drops of water that slowly wear away a stone. Consider the words of philosopher Herbert Spencer. Each faculty acquires fitness for its function by performing its function. And if its function is performed for it by a substitute agency, none of the required adjustment of nature takes place. But the nature becomes deformed to fit the artificial arrangements instead of the natural arrangements. So the fundamental point of use effects functioning is that we have a choice about how we use ourselves, and that choice has profound consequences for our quality of life. Principle number 2 is the idea of the whole person. Now, this is a phrase you hear a lot about nowadays, but in the late 1890s and at the turn of the century, when Alexander was first talking about this, it was pretty revolutionary stuff. And the beauty of Alexander's discovery is that he didn't read this in some philosophy book. He wasn't studying Eastern philosophy. He was trying to solve a real-life problem. He was taking responsibility for improving his own performance. And the first thing he recognized was that his whole body worked as one whole system. He realized that when he stiffened his neck, it seemed to affect the balance of his whole body. His chest went out, his back went in, the joint surfaces of his body began to stiffen up and shorten. He realized that the body functions as a whole. Then, with further practical study and investigation, it started to occur to him that the body was always reflecting the state of the mind. In other words, as soon as he began to think about speaking, he noticed this contraction pattern. After a while, it occurred to him that the thought and the bodily response were the same thing. So that in order to change the bodily response, he had to change the thought. The whole pattern had to be changed together. In his own words, he said, the human organism always functions as a whole and can only be fundamentally changed as a whole. Alexander's key point of leverage in organizing or reorganizing the whole person was what he called the primary control. Alexander realized that the balance of the head was the key factor in determining the overall balance and coordination of the whole system. Once again, if you think about it, it's common sense. Next time you have a chance, pick up a 15-pound weight and just hold it in your hand. It's pretty heavy. That's how much the average head weighs. Now, if you have this 15-pound weight that happens to hold your brain, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth, and your main balancing mechanisms, if you have this 15-pound weight delicately balanced on top of this long, unstable column, also known as your spine, well, what's going to happen to the spine and indeed to the whole body if that 15-pound weight is thrown out of whack? Well, clearly the whole system will be out of whack. In a fascinating study at Tufts University, Dr. Frank Pierce Jones took 1,000 people, one at a time, and had them stand in their best posture. He then wired them up with electromyographical equipment and stroboscopic cameras ready to record their any movement. Then, when they least expected it, he made a sudden, unexpected noise, such as slamming the door. Well, what do you do if you hear a sudden, unexpected noise? That's right, of course, you jump. Well, Jones was studying that jumping reaction to break it down, try to see exactly what happened. What he found was that when people were scared suddenly, they responded, first of all, by blinking their eyes and stiffening their necks. They shortened their neck muscles, thereby causing the head to go back in relationship to the neck. Then they raised their chests and held their breath, narrowed their lower backs, stiffened their hip joints, knee joints, and ankle joints. So this pattern, which he came to call the startle pattern, began at the top and went like a shot right down through the body. Jones observed further that this pattern was a model for general human responses to fear. When we're frightened, when we're anxious, when we're worried, we tend to stiffen the neck, throw the head back, hold our breath, narrow our lower back, and tighten all the major joint surfaces of the body. Jones observed further that for most people, this pattern becomes a fundamental habit. In other words, modern life for most folks is so stressful that we're all walking around in a modified form of startle pattern. When Alexander was getting ready to speak, before he began his investigation, what was basically happening was the thought of speaking was throwing him into the startle pattern. And pulling his head back, stiffening his neck, was causing a depression of his larynx, and the tension in his larynx eventually caused him to lose his voice. He realized that he had to change his head balance in order to change the overall balance of his body and mind. And he called this fundamental shift in head balance the primary control. This sounds pretty simple so far. I mean, okay, function as a whole, use affects functioning, that's common sense. So just get your head together, balance your head, stop tensing your neck, and everything will be fine. Well, the tricky part is principle number 4, unreliable sensory appreciation. Alexander found, first in himself and then in all the people who came to him for lessons, that most people had developed inaccurate sensitivity to their own body movement. In other words, just like the video example I gave you earlier, they weren't always doing what they thought they were doing, especially in matters that involved attempting to change habit. So the classic example of unreliable sensory appreciation that I've had in my own practice as an Alexander technique teacher is somebody who comes into my office and they're bent over and they lean a little bit to the right. That's their normal pattern of being. Well, you work with them through the Alexander method, and after a little while, they are beautifully upright and lengthening and much better balance, but they swear they're falling over to the left and backwards. So Alexander realized that in order to refine this unreliable sensory appreciation, he also called it debauched kinesthesia. The only way to free yourself from debauched kinesthesia was to get clear, objective feedback. Through objective, external feedback, you can begin to get a more accurate sense of what you're doing at any given time. And then you can practice the principle of inhibition. Inhibition, as Alexander means it, is very different than what Freud meant. Freud meant the repression of a drive from the id by the superego. What Alexander means is consciously pausing, putting a delay between the stimulus and your habitual response. Now, once again, this is common sense. I mean, when you were a kid and you got really angry, what was the classic advice? Count to 10. Right? You count to 10, your nervous system has a chance to settle down, and you're likely to make a more rational decision. Another good example of inhibition in nature is the way a cat stalks its prey. Right? It pauses. It doesn't just jump out prematurely. It waits and waits and waits to the right moment, and then boom, it strikes. Learning to inhibit our habitual responses to stimuli is a critical key to personal transformation. You know, a lot of the programs for self-development that are real popular these days offer you a real quick fix all your problems, come on our weekend seminar, you know, the 10 steps to total perfect new you, 10 new exercise, get super powered perfect abs by buying this machine, and so on and so forth. And it's always something new to do. Do this, do that, try this, try that. But I'll tell you, if you're really interested in profound change and transformation, it's not so much a matter of doing something new. It's much more a matter of undoing the things that you already do, the things you do that get in the way of your natural grace and poise, the things you do that get in the way of your natural intelligence and creative genius. Very often, the secret of learning, the secret of growth, is not to add something, but to subtract something. Alexander realized that if we could subtract this tendency to stiffen our necks, to go into the startle pattern, to destroy our head balance and therefore our overall mind-body balance, that in his own words, the right thing could begin to do itself. So the lesson of inhibition from Alexandrian perspective is get out of your own way. Learn to leave yourself alone. The principle of direction was Alexander's positive way of framing the idea of inhibition. He said, I want to inhibit the tendency to stiffen my neck, pull my head back, and shorten and narrow my stature. So thinking positively, what I want to allow is the natural direction of the organism. Neck to be free, head forward and up, back to lengthen and widen. And what he's saying there is to create this directional pattern, effectively this creative affirmation of our natural state. Look at a baby. A baby's body and being is directed, it's lengthening, it's expanding. Look at the great champions in any discipline. Muhammad Ali in his prime, Fred Astaire gliding across the floor, Arthur Rubinstein when he was at the piano. They all have this beautiful up quality. They're lengthened, they're poised, they're natural. This is our natural state. It's our natural birthright. And to return to the natural, we have to stop doing the unnatural. The last principle, balancing ends and means, ties it all together. Alexander realized that in order to change this pattern, he couldn't try to do it directly. The more effort he put into trying to do something besides the startle pattern, the more he seemed to go into the startle pattern. Ultimately, he realized he had to outwit his habitual patterns through an indirect, process-oriented approach. In other words, he had to focus on the idea that whatever action he would take it in the context of this overall pattern that ensured the best use of his mind and body. You know, in our world today, we get so caught up with going after goals, with trying to achieve things, that we can lose touch with our own being, with our own natural process. The Alexander work is a marvelous reminder to focus on being, on wholeness, while we pursue our goals. It's just like learning how to juggle. When I taught you how to juggle, remember I asked you to focus primarily on the throw and also on your own balance and your own breathing. If you pay attention to your own balance and you're breathing nice and easily and you focus on the throw, you'll learn to juggle much faster and much more gracefully than if you think, I've got to catch the balls, and your only focus is getting it right. Alexander called that premature grasping for results end-gaining. And we live in a world now that's gone mad for end-gaining and loses touch with the process, loses touch with the basics of fundamental being. So these are the 7 principles: use affects functioning, the whole person, the primary control, unreliable sensory appreciation, inhibition, direction, and balancing ends and means. I'd like to present just a few of the ways that Alexander's operational ideas are relevant to organizational change as well as individual change. Let's talk first about use and functioning. The word corporation comes from the root corpus, meaning body. And most corporate bodies suffer writ large from the same unreasoned habit and lack of conscious control that plague individuals. Many organizations are compelled, for example, by fear-inspired habit toward a short-term, exploitive, environmentally unsound approach to doing business. And believe it or not, these organizations continue to operate in this way, not so much out of evil, but usually from ignorance and fear. They're in a kind of organizational startle pattern. They don't recognize that they, in Alexander terms, have a choice about how to use themselves. The first step in organizational change is questioning habitual modes of operation while recognizing that choice is possible. The whole person. Alexander emphasized that the human organism always functions as a whole and can only be fundamentally changed as a whole. Of course, the same is true of organizations. As the complexity of our world multiplies exponentially, the application of systems thinking becomes more urgent. Renowned organizational consultant Peter Senge, author of The Fifth Discipline, defines systems thinking as seeing interrelationships rather than linear cause and effect chains, and seeing processes of change rather than snapshots. Senge writes that the unhealthiness of our world today is in direct proportion to our inability to see it as a whole. Experience of Alexander work makes one much more intimately attuned to the perception and management of whole systems. If you don't appreciate that your body works as a whole and your mind and body work as a whole system, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to appreciate the way an organization works as a whole system. So once again, we begin with self-knowledge and expand out from there. Now, in the individual, the primary control is the point of greatest leverage for organizing the system into a coordinated whole. And the head of an organization functions analogously. Organizations will be coordinated to the extent that their senior management encourages and actively supports universal participation in clarifying and living humane, systems-oriented visions, missions, and values. When leaders walk their talk, they nurture a shared sense of purpose that integrates and coordinates the action of all their members. Total unwavering commitment by senior management is the first step, the primary control in the process of organizational change and development. And unfortunately, the opposite is also true. When the head of an organization isn't aligned, is only paying lip service to a change effort, it's doomed to be uncoordinated. How does the idea of unreliable sensory appreciation relate to the organization? Well, most big organizations began life as an expression of an idealistic vision of one extraordinary person. As the organization grows, it almost invariably falls prey to bureaucratic habits, and idealism tends to fall by the wayside. Then, as rapid changes force bureaucracies to try to return to their more creative entrepreneurial roots, massive efforts are made to change cultures, promote leadership, quality, risk-taking, and empowerment. Many senior managers travel around giving motivational talks on change while continuing to function in a bureaucratic mode. It's rarely the result of malice. They're just usually unaware that their behavior is out of alignment with their words. Alexander became aware that he couldn't be sure he was doing what he thought he was doing while attempting to change a habit. And the same is true for people in organizations. Alexander's work provides a model for individuals and organizations to question the reliability of their perceptions so they're more likely to make the translation from idealistic theory into actual grounded practice. Alexander said that for the right thing to happen, one had to first stop doing the wrong thing. As individuals learn to question their bureaucratic, hierarchical worldview, they can choose not to act it out. Many organizations, for example, are hungry for new approaches to creative thinking and team problem solving. But frequently, organizations get caught up in superimposing new jargon on top of deeply rooted old habits. Real progress begins by truly letting go of old ways. As William James said, genius is the art of non-habitual thought. For individuals and organizations, inhibition is the cornerstone of change. And inhibition sets the stage for direction. When old habits are made conscious, and a delay is interposed between a stimulus and the habitual response, something new can happen. The organizational equivalent of direction, neck to be free, head forward and up, and so on, is systems-oriented strategic planning in the context of a shared sense of vision, mission, and values. An organization will be successful to the extent to which its members consciously integrate and apply its vision, mission, plan, and values, in other words, the organization's direction in their daily lives. Let's talk about balancing ends and means in the way it applies in organizations. The extraordinary growth of Japan's economy since World War II has been greatly influenced by an approach to business called Total Quality Management, or TQM. The essence of this approach is the design and implementation of cultures and systems that encourage workers to take responsibility for continuously improving their work. Curiously, this approach was pioneered by an American, Dr. Deming. Western companies ignored Deming's advice after the war, so he went to Japan, where he became a national hero. Now, in the U.S. and around the world, organizations are attempting to reform themselves in accordance with Deming's principles. Management guru and best-selling author Stephen Covey sums up the heart of TQM like this: quality, the result, is a function of quality, the process. Alexander's work offers a profound, process-oriented approach to improving the quality of life and of performance. Alexander invites us to continually improve the processes we apply in achieving our goals. The success of the quality revolution requires the application of Alexander's emphasis on the means whereby we achieve our goals. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is freedom from fear. To achieve quality, organizations must, according to Deming, drive out fear. He emphasizes that fear prevents people from acknowledging mistakes and asking for help, making continuous improvement impossible. He writes, "The economic loss from fear is appalling. Habits of responding fearfully run deep. The Alexander work offers a practical method for freeing ourselves from the legacy of fear. This freedom supports the expression of creative genius and organizational success. Although it's not a panacea, the Alexander technique does offer a profound experience of quality from the inside out, an experience which often provides the missing link in efforts to change."